you. My name is Patrick Antoine, your host on this platform. I'm thankful to God for this platform, which allows me the opportunity to provide biblical responses to questions from people just like you. If you have a question and you'd like for me to attempt an answer to that question, please feel free to submit that question, preferably via email, using the email address on the screen, and I'll try to provide you with a response as soon as I can. Today's question comes from the Gospels and a particular incident in which Jesus observed certain things which were happening in the temple. So the question is, does Jesus expect us to give as the poor widow did? So we need to turn to that passage. It's found in the Gospel according to Luke chapter 21. And I'll just quickly read the 4 verses where this incident with this poor widow is found. Jesus is there in the temple and says, and he looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites, not much money. So he said, truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all. For all these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God. But she, out of her poverty, put in all the livelihood that she had. Obviously, Jesus knew this woman didn't have much money, and that what she put in there is pretty much all that she had. And in the past, I fell into a trap also, like so many do, even to this day, in misunderstanding Jesus's intent for making those comments after his observation of this poor widow giving these couple coins, which he recognized and he knew was all that she had. So, chapter divisions in the Bible, we always need to be careful with them, because sometimes when we read, let's say, from a particular place in the Bible, we think, okay, that's a good place to start, especially chapter divisions. But chapter divisions are not, as they say, inspired. They're there for our ease of reference, but the writers didn't have them there. They just wrote. And very often chapter divisions cause us to miss the context in which a writer said something or wrote something. This is another case in point. To understand the intent of both the writer, Luke, and the speaker, Jesus, you need to go back to what was happening in the previous chapter and ignore the chapter division. And like I said, at one time, we read this passage and you think all it's really teaching is the importance of giving sacrificially, that God blesses you if you give sacrificially. And I'm going to come to that in a little while. This is not what Jesus is talking about or teaching here. The very first word in this chapter is "and." That in itself should have been a giveaway, that you don't normally begin a paragraph with "and." "And" is a connective. It connects us with something that was there before, and that in itself should tell you, if you're going to interpret this passage correctly, read what was there before. So when you see words like and but and therefore and for, F-O-R, you'll know you need to pay attention to what was before. Chapter 20 of the Gospel according to Luke is filled with incidents with Jesus having problems and confrontations with the religious leaders. They kept trying to trap him. And finally, as we come to the end of chapter 20, Jesus turns his attention away from those, his enemies who were trying to destroy him, the religious leaders, and he begins to speak to the disciples now. And this is the context of this thing. He's explaining something to the disciples arising out of what he saw in the scribes and the Pharisees. So let's look at the last 3 verses of chapter 20. Then, in the hearing of all the people, he said, notice who he's speaking to. He's not responding to the religious leaders. He's speaking to the disciples. He said to his disciples, beware of the scribes who desire to go around in long robes love greetings in the marketplaces, the best seats in the synagogues, and the best places at feasts. He said, beware of these men who devour widows' houses. Here's that word widow. That's something we should have picked up for the average person. We read into chapter 21 without reading this. They devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation. Then, while he's talking to them, he observes across the treasury, and there is a case in point. He sees this widow, a poor widow, coming and giving what she has. Jesus's intent was not to say, be like her, give sacrificially. No, this is in the context of these religious leaders who kept confronting Jesus in chapter 20. Jesus says, beware of them, and he says, look. And his point was, Jesus was highlighting to the disciples and to us that the motive and the outcome of a system controlled by religious hypocrites like these religious leaders in Jesus' day, who taught the people that this is how you stay in God's favor. Keep giving, give sacrificially, give everything, and you will receive the blessing of God. And what were they telling the people that for? So that the people will keep giving and giving and giving, and they will be building all of these ornate buildings and so on, and they'll be, of course, filling their own pockets and controlling this system where people were made to feel that this is how you stay in God's favor. Give, give, give. Otherwise, God will not be pleased with you. You will not be blessed unless you give. And if you wanted to have the favor of God remain on your life, you need to keep giving to them. And this is what Jesus was saying to beware of. And if you don't give, that's what the religious leaders would be saying, God's favor would be lifted from your life. So people would go out of their way because of what they were taught, that they think that they had to keep giving and giving and giving, even if it puts you into greater poverty. Keep giving. So those men who should have been feeding the flock of God and nurturing God's people with the truth of God's word, instead they were feeding themselves. They loved the greetings, they loved the positions they held in society. So instead of nurturing the sheep, from the sheep, they would take, so to speak, I'm using the word sheep metaphorically, they will take the wool for themselves. They will take the milk for themselves. From the sheep, they will take the hide to make leather so that they can sell leather products. They will even drain the very blood of the sheep and then eat the meat afterwards. That's what they were doing to the people. And Jesus was highlighting, look at all that woman. She had to give and give and give because of the system that was controlled by these religious leaders. This is why when you read the next couple of verses after that incident, when you read further in Luke chapter 21, you'll see what Jesus was saying when he said they will receive greater condemnation. You read verses 5 and 6. Then as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations, Jesus said, these things which you see, the days will come in which not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. And so said, so done. God brought judgment upon that whole system and all of those things that these men loved to be in control of. Today we see them on television. They don't have long robes like in Jesus' day and love the best seats. Well, yeah, they still love the best seats and they love titles. And they would have the best suits, not necessarily the long robes, and they'll plead with you, give, keep giving. Send the best check, send the best offering, and they will bleed people of as much money as possible. And Jesus said God's wrath will come upon people like that. It wasn't that Jesus had a problem with sacrificial giving, but these men who controlled a system that exploited people to that point, like they were exploiting, look at that widow who felt that she had to keep giving this so that she could be in God's favor. And there are people who will be on the television or come to your churches and they will tell you that give, 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 and they will drain the very lifeblood of the sheep to build their own, well, in some cases, they have their jets, they have their expensive cars, whatever it is. That is what Jesus was condemning. He was not commending this woman for giving sacrificially, as many people think that's what he was doing. No, you need to read what was happening before these religious leaders who were trying to destroy Jesus. He was talking about them and how they exploit people, like widows like that woman. So the key to understanding what Jesus is saying, I think, is the word "and" at the beginning of chapter 21. And if you go back to chapter 20 and you read, for instance, verse 46, that word, the very first word, beware. Jesus was not saying, be like this woman. Nothing is wrong with how she was being and giving, but he was saying, beware of people who exploit others for their own gain. They will receive greater condemnation for exploiting God's people, taking advantage of God's sheep. And that is what Jesus meant. He wasn't expecting that we should take all our money and keep giving it to people who will consume it upon themselves. My name is Patrick Antoine. Thank you for the question, and I hope my answer helps in some way in you understanding what Jesus' intention was. So until the next time, grace and peace be